Greetings, everyone. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that you are here. I am really excited about today's topic. It's about card evaluation. This one's near and dear to my heart because I'm a brewer. I really enjoy building decks that typically do wild and crazy things. Sometimes they're good, sometimes less so, but I love that aspect to the game of Magic. Poker is a great game. Cards are always the same. They always do the same things. You get them in different orders and it changes the thing, but in large part, you end up playing your opponent. I love that I can have the same card in this deck and the same card in that deck, and they do two entirely different things in certain situations and stuff, right? So brewing, oh my gosh, amazing. But I, just as much as the next person, will often fall into the same trap of being really excited about a card and then being disappointed about it. Well, there are different lenses through which you can view a card that will help you learn whether or not a card is going to be good. I want to preface all of this with this statement, though. No matter how much you feel about a card, the only way you can actually know if that card is going to perform is through playing it. One of the key cards that I would say I kind of underestimated was Elspeth Conquers Death. When I first saw that card, I said, yeah, but it's good for sure, but it kind of comes down late, and it's, it's only going to hit smaller, or it can't hit any of the smaller creatures, so if you're getting beat down, I don't know. It just seems like a worse Eldest Reborn. That was incorrect. Elspeth Conquers Death, very, very good. Well, it didn't take me long to discover that, darn it. As soon as I got my hands on that card, I was like, oh no, this is great, right? It is a better Eldest Reborn, as they would say. And of course, I said worse because the targeting was not as strict. And the Eldest Reborn made the discard happen, and then you could reanimate from any graveyard and all that stuff. It just turns out the actual package is much better, or plays much better than it read on paper when you're comparing the two cards, right? It turns out Elspeth Conquers Death is insane, right? It's a very, very good card. But I didn't know that until I started playing with it. So the first thing about card evaluation is keep an open mind. A lot of people really slept on the card Skyclave Apparition that just recently came out in Zendikar Rising. That card is very, very strong, but it reads like Banisher Priest, which is a less exciting card. It's a fine card, but it's a less exciting card. No. Skyclave Apparition, much, much better than Banisher Priest most of the time, right? So the key thing, keep an open mind, play with the cards before you actually make up your mind. I can understand not wanting to go back and have to keep jamming at this card over and over and over to make it good. No. You don't necessarily need to do that, but at least play with them before you shut your mind on a topic. But now that that's out of the way, let's talk about some more specifics of card evaluation. The first thing you need to evaluate about a card isn't even actually the card. It's the format. What format are you going to be playing this card in? Because playing this in Limited is one thing. Playing this in Commander is a different thing. Playing this in Standard is going to be different from either of those, and heavens to Murgatroyd, Modern or Legacy doesn't even look anything like those formats, right? So what does the format look like? Modern sees a lot of Fatal Push. So creatures 2 CMC or less need to do something or be powerful enough to justify having easy access to Fatal Push, in the same way that there's a lot of Lightning Bolt. So you 3 toughness or left creatures, that doesn't mean they're bad, heavens knows. There are plenty of really good creatures that kind of fall into those categories, but they have to do something good enough to justify passing the Fatal Push or Lightning Bolt test in Modern. There is no Lightning Bolt or Fatal Push in Standard, so when you're evaluating cards for them, the surrounding cards also matter. It also matters the most powerful cards in the format are going to be played. So in Standard, one of the most powerful cards that you will regularly see is Bone Crusher Giant. It is a burn spell. It is a creature. You are going to see a lot of this card, not just in mono red, but other decks as well. How does your card stack up against Bone Crusher Giant? Oh, it just gets completely wrecked. I can't play it. No, that's not true. But it is a point of data. If this card would have been an A+, but Bone Crusher Giant being one of the most commonly played cards in the format, being good against it, maybe now it's just an A, right? It's still a great card. You can still play this card that gets wrecked by Bone Crusher Giant. Do not be discouraged. But it is a point of data. In that same way, like in a format like Historic, it isn't just the removal spells and things. It's what other creatures are seeing play. It will change the cards that are good. So for instance, if Llanowar Elves is one of the best cards in the format, and right now I wouldn't say that it's, you know, a top 3 sort of thing, but it is a very, very strong card. And as soon as the meta shifts, I could easily see Llanowar Elves being strong at any given time. It is one of the scariest things to have in the format is your opponent being on the play and they go land, Llanowar, go, and you just go tapped land or something. You may have just lost, right? The opponent will be so far ahead by the time you do anything, the game could easily be over. So it's got that power level. So if Llanowar Elves is in a position where it's very strong, having 1 mana removal spells would be very, very good, such as Fatal Push, such as Shock, such as Spike Field Hazard, something like that, would be very, very good because Llanowar Elves right now in this hypothetical meta is very good, very good. Let's talk about a more specific card that is good right now. Skirk Prospector in Historic is very good right now, right? Oftentimes, if your opponent goes turn 1 Skirk Prospector and you're looking at a hand without removal, the game has ended. You are now praying that the top of your deck provides some way of handling this card because your opponent will land a Muxus as soon as turn 3 and can win off of the Muxus touching the an empty battlefield. We've probably all experienced that if you've played any Historic, right? So being able to remove Skirk Prospector, very, very important in the current format. So having removal for it is good. So when we see a 1 mana removal spell of almost any variety because of Skirk Prospector, and to a lesser extent, yeah, like Llanowar Elves, things like that, that 1 mana removal spell, it actually goes up just a little bit in value because of these other cards that are good, right? Well, what about, I don't know, a 4 mana removal spell? It's like really powerful, does really powerful things, does good, wonderful, happy things. Well, I mean, it might still be good. It depends on how good, right? Like Elspeth Conquers Death. It's still good, but it doesn't see as much play in Historic as the season standard because you might be dead by the time this thing happens. And of course, Elspeth Conquers Death being a 5-drop, but you understand what I'm saying. Very, very good card, very relevant removal spell. Again, one of the cards I personally kind of misevaluated a little bit, but darn it. Even though it's very good and very powerful, the context of the format means its power level maybe went from an A+ down to, I don't even know, maybe more like a B- or something like that, or a B. You know, it's now a situational removal spell, not a jam this in every deck sort of removal spell. So these situations are very, very important. In that same way, there are other concerns as well. Now, Field of the Dead, I am showing you here, is actually banned in Historic. Well, why? It's a land. Why would they need to ban a land? Well, anyone who faced off against it, whether or not you felt like the banning was just, you understand why, darn it. Because holy crud, they could do crazy, crazy things by this land. So, for instance, and the only reason I bring this up, because it's banned, is that if a land is good in the format, ways of removing that land instantly become better. You know, so Ghost Quarters and Field of Ruins and things take a step up in the ranks. And as such, since now you need to include colorless lands, maybe that 3rd color that you were just going to splash for 1 or 2 cards, maybe that's not worth it anymore. Maybe you need to be on 1 or 2 mana. And if these 1 or 2 mana things are better, suddenly a 3-color card is less good, right? Now, again, I'm not saying don't play 3-color cards. No. I'm saying that instead of it being an A-, maybe that 3-color card is now a B or something because of how good Field of the Dead is, and having answers to Field of the Dead is very important in this proverbial situation, right? You understand? So card evaluation does fluctuate. There is not an assigned value for this card, and that's just what that card is. Again, and this is all talking about within the context of one format. So Field of the Dead in this format, so good it got banned, as a matter of fact. But then something like Vintage or something, it's not broken, right? Because of the context of the format, right? So in that way, considering power levels fluctuate, there are other concerns to take into account. The first thing to take into account, what does this card do for me in these two situations specifically? What does this card do while I'm ahead? And what does this card do when I'm behind? Okay? So, Llanowar Elves, a perfect example of this card. Turn 1, you're on the draw. Okay? You are by virtue behind. Your opponent has things on the battlefield and you do not, right? On the draw percentage wins are less, for better or worse, and there's debates and stuff to be had on that topic, but as it stands, if you are on the draw, you are behind. Your opponent goes tap land. Go. You are on the draw. You go land Llanowar. What just happened? Well, you went from behind to ahead in one card's worth of interaction. Now, the opponent's going to be playing Magic. Maybe they'll bolt your Llanowar Elves and things like that, right? They might, there's any number of things that can happen in a game of Magic, but what does Llanowar Elves do for me behind? Well, it can help catch me up. It accelerates me. It moves the pace of the game ahead for me. So what does Llanowar Elves do for me when I'm behind? Good things in the early game. Now, what about on turn 7? When you're really praying for, whatever, a 5 or 6 drop off the top of your library, you reach there and you grab the card and it's still Llanowar Elves. It's different now, isn't it? Yeah. Man, this 1/1, not looking too good. You really wish this was anything else, but it's not. So, Llanowar Elves, crazy good in the early game, less good in the late game, right? These are card evaluations. Is it worth it? In Llanowar Elves' case, absolutely. This card is bonkers. Very, very strong in the correct situations for it, obviously. And it's a very good card. How about the converse? What does this do when I'm ahead? Okay? How about when you're the land Llanowar and your opponent goes tap land? And, and you were on the play. Oh boy. Yeah. Now, you untap and you have 3 mana and then you cast anything, right? Very, very strong interaction and can easily win you the game. And then late in the game, when you're on when you're really wishing for a big 5 or 6 drop and it doesn't come off the library, but you're ahead. So it doesn't slam the door on your opponent or anything, but it's not the end of the world or whatever, right? So you want to use Llanowar Elves in decks that are going to make sure it doesn't get to that late game, because it certainly doesn't help you in late game when you're ahead either, right? So, but in the early game, as you can see, both Llanowar Elves when you're behind or when you're ahead do very, very good things for you. It's a very, very good card. So, putting Llanowar Elves in a deck that's relying on going till turn 20, I mean, it can work. It depends on what your actual game plan is, but it's a lot less likely to do crazy powerful good things. Llanowar Elves is going to shine in decks where you're hoping to have your opponent dead by turn, whatever, 4 or 5, right? That's where Llanowar Elves is going to shine because of this card evaluation. What is it doing ahead? What is it doing behind? What does it do when it comes off the top of my library late? What does it do when it comes off the top of my library early, right? These are key card evaluations. Another key way of looking at cards specifically is what happens when it gets removed. When they bolt your Llanowar Elves. Well, okay, it stinks. But you got a removal spell out of their hand for your 1-drop. That's good. Especially, I mean, if it was an actual shock or an actual lightning bolt or something, that costs 1 mana, so you traded 1 mana for 1 mana. But what if your opponent has to use a Bone Crusher Giant on it? Well, you spent 1 mana to get a Llanowar Elves down. Your opponent had to spend 2 mana to kill Llanowar Elves. your opponent had to waste more mana than you did. You are ahead in this mana exchange. And if you are playing a more tempo style oriented deck or maybe more aggressive deck, that can mean everything. Your opponent is behind in this exchange. So on its face, it would look like, yeah, but I lost my Llanowar Elves. No. Don't look at it that way. Your opponent lost their Bonecrusher Giant. That's the way to look at this, because they lost on this exchange, right? So what does that happen if it's removal and it was a, whatever, Baneslayer Angel? I love this card. Some of you may know this is my favorite card all time, even though it's kind of maybe lost a little bit of its luster since its first printing. I love this card. But if I go, 5 mana Baneslayer and they go 2 mana Heartless Act, my Baneslayer Angel, I lost 3 mana on this exchange. Is that is a game over? Probably not. And what does Baneslayer do when I'm ahead? It slams the door. It's a 5/5 flying first strike lifelink. I will be able to kill my opponent very, very quickly if I'm ahead. What does it do for me when I'm behind? It blocks really, really well and gains me life. 5/5 first strike lifelink is a powerful, powerful deterrent to all but the most crazy creatures, right? And it also means I can start attacking even when I was behind. Let's say I'm on 6 life. Baneslayer Angel go. The opponent's like, oh my gosh. Next turn, I can start attacking. Now I'm on 11. Go ahead, attack. Well, I'm gonna attack again next turn, and then and my life continues to grow because of this powerful lifelink. Very, very good while I'm ahead. Very, very good while I'm behind. But the removal spell, though, that does need to be taken into account. The whole dies to removal argument is an argument because it does evaluate cards. It is not the end-all be-all, right? There are other factors to take into account when you're card evaluating, but it is a point of data. So Baneslayer Angel, if it gets removed, I lose basically everything from this 5 mana. Now, if we are talking about, let's say, Bonecrusher Giant, when I have already shocked from this card, and then I cast Bonecrusher Giant, and the opponent goes, okay, Heartless Act, and take 2 from Bonecrusher Giant, Bonecrusher Giant still never attacked. Theoretically, Bonecrusher Giant is in the same situation as Baneslayer Angel, only, holy cow, I have gotten a ton of value for this card before the removal spell ever happened. Even though it never attacked, it never blocked or anything, it has given me more, right? Now, I'm not saying necessarily Bonecrusher Giant is a better card than Baneslayer Angel, but I do think there is an argument to be made for that. In the abstract, in some proverbial format that may or may not even exist, Bonecrusher Giant is a better card because of that sort of tension. Another thing that you can use to evaluate cards is what happens if this is counterspell, right? Oftentimes newer players do kind of ignore this whole counterspell issue because it's only very select matchups, and we're going to get to matchup specific things here in just a minute. But what happens if it's countered? Okay. That means anything that says this spell can't be countered automatically gets just a little bit of a bump because it moves up. So a card like Chandra Awakened Inferno is balanced because it's 6 mana, and that's a lot of mana to dump. But make no mistake, it's insanely powerful. When it comes down, it can't be countered. They cannot stop this. It's going to happen. What does it do when I'm behind? Well, it -3s to sweep the board and deal a bunch of damage and get rid of all the creatures, right? Or it -X's to kill a planeswalker or a very specific large creature. Or what does it do for me when I'm ahead? Well, it comes down, can't be countered, and it pluses immediately. So they have removal. So what? They're immediately taking damage every single turn for the rest of the game on an emblem that can't be removed, right? Very, very strong. In that same way, can't be countered does not matter against mono red. They're not going to be any counters. Against mono white, there's not going to be any counters, right? So it is a very small thing, but it is worth considering because there are certain decks that you might build that just simply cannot beat a counterspell. And some percentage of decks I run into, even if it's only 10 or 15% of decks, will have some number of counterspells. So we have played on this channel before Treasure Hunt and Thassa's Oracle combo, where you just have whatever it is, like 45 lands, cast Treasure Hunt, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land, and then at the end of the turn we just discard a bunch of lands, and we drew into another treasure hunt or a Thassa's Oracle, and then we treasure hunt again and treasure hunt again, and then there is one single Thassa's Oracle in the deck. You cast Thassa's Oracle, and your opponent goes Counterspell, and the game is over. There is no way for you to win the game. You automatically lose the game if your opponent has a Counterspell. Now, this is an extreme example. But in decks with very, very few win conditions, let's say you've only got, 2 Planeswalkers in your entire deck to win the game, and the rest of it's just like, board sweepers and removal and stuff. Well, darn it, you better also have some counterspells, because if your opponent counterspells your win condition, you've only got one more left. And then maybe it gets milled over or something like that. You actually cannot win. It needs to be considered what you would do if these were the case, right? So these things are fine and worth considering, but it is the thing. Now, the last, and we're going kind of long here, folks, I apologize, but the last area of consideration that I would posit is, what does certain cards do in certain decks or in certain matchups? So, again, the counterspell argument is the easiest one. This spell can't be countered. If your entire deck is a bunch of counterspells and like 2 removal spells and 2 win conditions, if I cast Thought Distortion, the game is probably over. Target opponent reveals their hand, exile all non-creature and non-main cards, or whatever. What happens if I'm against an all-creature deck and I Thought Distortion? It doesn't do anything. I just tapped 6 lands and did stone nothing, right? So this deck is great in the sideboard for those sorts of matchups, but it sure doesn't do a whole lot in certain matchups. So putting a bunch of Thought Distortion in the main, like 4 Thought Distortion in the main or something, probably not great. Because there are plenty of times you'll just draw this card and it'll be early in the game and you don't have enough mana to cast it, and then you lose. Or it'll be like, against a creature deck and you'll lose, or things like that. And so even though this card is very powerful, the power level of this card is sky's the limit. Win the game on cast in certain matchups, its power level is actually 0 in other matchups, right? So that wild variance in power that doesn't mean it's a bad card. Also doesn't mean it's a good card, right? It means you got to evaluate that and put it only in decks that matter, or that want this sort of effect. So maybe, again, in the sideboard for best of 3, or ways that have a wish board so you can go and fetch it or something like that, right? And then key matchup cards. So, for instance, this spell can't be countered. Protection from Blue. So this is another card that would be very, very good in certain matchups. So again, sideboard cards, things like that. And oftentimes people will poo-poo at sideboard cards. It's just a sideboard card or something. No. Sideboard cards can often swing matchups from negative to positive in a heartbeat, just for their own power level. So worth considering. And then finally, card evaluation cannot just matter for other things your opponents can play, but cards that you can play. So I'm going to show you another banned card. Oko, Thief of Crowns, banned in the historic format, banned in the standard format, banned in, just about everywhere it can be banned, all things considered, because it's so powerful that at the time, Wicked Wolf was one of the best cards in standard, as long as Oko was legal. And now Wicked Wolf is still legal, sees a little play here and there, but it has not seen play in every green deck, necessarily, right? Well, why? Because other cards were helping this card so much, that in this case, Oko, very, very strong card, was also increasing the power level of other cards. So in the same way, if maybe there was a really, really powerful 3-mana green card, Llanowar Elf gets better, right? Or if there is some really easy way of getting to 6 mana in red, maybe Chandra gets better, or something like that. So these other cards that surround this card can also improve its power level and need to be considered. Not the least of which is these sort of things that have, combos associated, like Vizier of Remedies and Devoted Druid. Neither of those is a very crazy card. I mean, they're fine. But in Modern, since they both exist, it's an infinite mana combo, right? So even though on power level, each of those is mediocre to possibly even poor most of the time, given the context of other cards existing, those cards' power level goes up exponentially when they're together, right? So all those things being considered, let me know down in the comments below how you feel about this and what sorts of cards you think would be worthy of inclusion on this list. I really appreciate it. I also stream. Come catch me, or link in the description below. That said, I will catch you all next time.